No African woman knew that the Arab executive's manhood was a snake until this happened. A powerful Arab billionaire, a mysterious African tribe, and a secret hidden within ancient mysticism. When Sheikh Khalid al-Mansour, a feared yet admired oil executive, embarks on a journey to a remote African village, he expects nothing more than a business deal, perhaps even an exotic adventure. But what he finds will change his life forever. The villagers sense something different about him. Their wise elders whisper about omens and ancient prophecies, and the tribal women gaze upon him with curiosity. None more than Nia, a strikingly beautiful healer with eyes that seem to see into his very soul. But soon whispers turn into fear. Something about Khalid is unnatural. Strange visions haunt him, and the women of the tribe begin to notice something beyond human within him. Then, on a fateful night under the full moon, the truth is revealed, a truth so shocking it will shake the foundations of everything Khalid and Naya believe in. No African woman knew that the Arab executive's manhood was a snake until this happened. What ancient mystery is hidden within Khalid's bloodline? Why was he drawn to this remote tribe in the first place? And will his forbidden love with Naya break the curse or doom them both forever? Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more thrilling and mysterious stories like this to you. The golden sands of the desert stretched endlessly beneath the jet's wings as Sheikh Khalid al-Mansour leaned back in his leather seat, swirling a glass of dark whiskey in his hand. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, stared out of the window as his private plane descended toward the vast African wilderness, a place untouched by modern civilization, where ancient tribes still lived by the laws of their ancestors. He was a man of power, wealth, and ruthless ambition. His empire spanned across continents, his influence reaching the highest circles of the Arab world. Yet, for reasons he himself couldn't explain, he had agreed to this strange and secretive journey, a business deal unlike any other, arranged through whispers and letters instead of contracts and negotiations. As the plane touched down on a remote airstrip, the air was thick with humidity, the scent of rain and earth filling his lungs. Outside, a convoy of black SUVs awaited him, a stark contrast to the dense jungle looming beyond. A man dressed in traditional robes, tall, dark-skinned, with piercing eyes, stepped forward. "Welcome, Sheikh al-Mansour," he said in Arabic, bowing slightly. "The elders are expecting you." Khalid adjusted his dark, tailored suit, feeling out of place yet strangely drawn to the land around him. He had visited many countries, closed countless deals, but this was different. The convoy took off into the wilderness, moving deeper and deeper into uncharted territory, where the roads turned into mere dirt paths and the dense foliage seemed to close in around them. Khalid noticed the way the locals stared at him as they passed through small villages, some with curiosity, others with something else, something closer to fear. Finally, after what felt like hours, they arrived at the heart of the tribe's territory. Towering trees, ancient wooden carvings, and a massive bonfire crackling in the center of a ceremonial ground awaited him. The village was alive with music, rhythmic drums echoing through the night as dancers, their bodies painted with sacred symbols, moved in hypnotic patterns. At the center of it all stood Naya. She was unlike any woman he had ever seen. Tall, with dark, glowing skin, high cheekbones, and eyes like burning amber, she exuded an energy that was both calm and unsettling. Her body was adorned with gold jewelry, her long braids swaying as she moved. When she turned to look at him, Khalid felt something deep inside him shift, as if a forgotten memory had been unlocked. She knew him, and somehow he knew her too. The tribal elders sat on thrones carved from ancient trees, their eyes heavy with wisdom as they watched Khalid approach. One of them, a man so old his skin seemed like cracked leather, raised a hand to silence the music. "Sheikh al-Mansur," the elder spoke in a low, commanding voice. "You have finally come." Khalid frowned. Finally? He had never set foot here before. Before he could speak, Naya stepped forward, her voice smooth as silk, but carrying the weight of a prophecy spoken long before he was born. "You do not remember, but your bloodline does." The flames from the bonfire flickered violently, casting shadows that seemed to twist into shapes of coiling serpents. A cold shiver ran down Khalid's spine. The air felt thicker, the jungle around him suddenly alive. Something was wrong. And in that moment, for the first time in his life, Sheikh Khalid al-Mansur felt fear. Khalid's heart pounded against his ribs as Nia's words echoed in his mind. "You do not remember, but your bloodline does." The flames flickered, twisting into serpentine shapes, their shadows stretching unnaturally along the ground. The jungle seemed to close in around them, as if the very earth itself was listening. He was not a man prone to fear. In the world of business, he had conquered empires, bent the will of the most powerful, and ruled with an iron grip. But here, in the depths of an unknown land, standing before a woman whose gaze felt ancient and knowing, he felt small, as if he was merely a piece in a much greater design. "What are you talking about?" Khalid finally spoke, his voice strong, but there was an edge of unease beneath it. "I have never been here before. I don't know any of you." Nia didn't flinch. Her amber eyes gleamed as she stepped closer. "No," she said softly, "but the spirit within you does." The elder who had spoken before now stood, leaning on his wooden staff. His presence was commanding, despite his fragile frame. "Come," he beckoned. "It is time you see for yourself." Khalid glanced at the convoy of SUVs behind him, at the men who had accompanied him, his bodyguards, his advisors. They stood motionless, their expressions unreadable. He turned back to Nia and the elder. He could walk away now, demand to speak about the business deal he had come for, but something inside him refused to leave. And so, without another word, he followed them into the dark jungle. The sacred cave. The path was narrow, illuminated only by torches carried by silent villagers. The deeper they went, the thicker the air became, humid, heavy, and filled with an unplaceable scent. Soon, they reached the entrance of a cave, its mouth wide and yawning, lined with carvings older than time itself. Khalid hesitated. Nia turned to him. "Inside, you will understand." He clenched his jaw, then stepped forward. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, a wave of energy crashed over him, like fire in his veins, like ice in his breath. Memories that weren't his flooded his mind. Visions of another man, another time. A warrior with his face, standing before the same cave, his arms raised in devotion. A tribe surrounding him, chanting in a forgotten tongue. A massive serpent slithering in the shadows, its golden eyes burning with knowledge. Then pain. A searing, unbearable pain in his body. Khalid gasped, stumbling back as the vision ended. His chest heaved, his hands were shaking. Naya was watching him. "You have seen it," she said. "The curse of your ancestors." Khalid wiped sweat from his brow. What is happening to me? The elder stepped forward, his voice solemn. Your family's bloodline carries the mark of the serpent god. You were born with its spirit inside you, waiting to awaken. That time has come. Khalid's skin crawled. His mind screamed at him to reject this absurdity. But the fire in his veins, the lingering shadows in his vision. He couldn't deny that something was changing within him. Nia approached him slowly, her fingers brushing against his wrist. The moment they touched, a shock of energy passed between them, making them both inhale sharply. Her eyes widened in realization. You are not the only one bound to this fate, she whispered. So am I. Khalid's breath caught. The prophecy was not only about him, it was about them. And something deep in his soul told him that this woman, this mystical, untouchable being, would either be his salvation or his doom. The cave's air was thick with moisture, the scent of damp earth and ancient incense clinging to Khalid's skin as he stood motionless, his breath uneven. His mind still reeled from the vision, from the phantom fire burning in his veins. He could still hear the echoes of chants in a language he had never spoken, yet somehow understood. The elder watched him with solemn eyes, his wrinkled hands gripping the carved wooden staff that looked older than time itself. Nia stood just inches away, her gaze locked onto his, searching for something, perhaps an answer he did not yet have. You have awakened it, the elder finally said, his voice deep and steady, as if he had seen this all before. It was always meant to happen. Khalid shook his head, stepping back as if to escape the weight of their words. This is madness. I came here for business, not to play part in some ancient myth. Nia's lips pressed into a thin line. And yet, you are here, and the visions have come to you. Do you truly believe that is coincidence? Khalid clenched his fists. He had spent his entire life controlling outcomes, bending the world to his will. But this was something he could not rationalize. Nia reached for his wrist again, and when their skin met, a surge of energy rippled through him, more powerful than before. It was not pain, but something deeper, something primal. He exhaled sharply, eyes darkening as his muscles tensed. She did not let go. You feel it, she said, her voice softer now. Because it is real. He tore his hand away, stepping further back. And what is it exactly? What am I supposed to believe? The elder motioned toward the dark depths of the cave. Come, he said simply, then turned and walked further into the shadows. Khalid hesitated, but Nia followed without question. The way she moved, graceful yet commanding, made something in him tighten. He should leave. He should turn around, get back into his convoy, and return to the world he understood. But he didn't. Instead, he followed them deeper. The torches lining the walls flickered as they moved, casting elongated shadows across the damp stone. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, depictions of men with serpents coiled around them, their bodies morphing, transforming. Khalid's pulse quickened as realization dawned. These were not just stories. They were warnings. At the heart of the cave lay an altar, carved from the rock itself, covered in ancient markings. At its center was a massive stone bowl filled with dark liquid. The elder stood beside it, his expression unreadable. This is the blood of the serpent god, he said, passed down from the first to be chosen. Khalid stared at the bowl, his body unwillingly drawn toward it. The liquid inside shimmered under the torchlight, almost alive. He swallowed hard, unwilling to accept the growing certainty in his chest. Nia stepped beside him. You are not the first to carry this burden, nor will you be the last, but you must understand what it means before it consumes you. He turned to her sharply. And you say you are bound to this as well. What does that mean? She hesitated, then reached up to untie the leather cord around her neck. A small pendant rested against her chest, one he had not noticed before. It was a carved serpent, identical to the ones depicted on the cave walls. My mother carried this before me, and her mother before her. Her fingers brushed over the pendant. It is said that those chosen by the serpent god are fated to find each other, that one cannot exist without the other. Khalid's mind whirled. You mean to tell me that my coming here, meeting you, this was all predestined? Yes, the elder answered. Your ancestors tried to run from their fate. That is why the curse remained unbroken. Khalid exhaled harshly, shaking his head. He had never believed in fate. Everything he had built, his wealth, his power, it had come from his decisions, his actions. He refused to accept that his life was not his own. This is ridiculous, he said. I am leaving. He turned sharply and started back toward the cave entrance, his heart hammering. But as he moved, a sharp pain shot through his body, sudden and violent. His vision blurred, and he stumbled forward, gripping his chest. His veins felt as if they were set ablaze, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Khalid! Nia's voice was distant, but she was there, catching him before he collapsed completely. The elder's voice was steady, unwavering. It is beginning. Khalid's body trembled as a sensation unlike anything he had ever felt took hold. His skin was too tight, his bones shifting, stretching. He gasped, trying to control it, to fight against whatever was happening. But it was useless. Then, for the first time, he felt it. A presence within him. Something ancient. Something powerful. And it was waking up. The pain coursed through Khalid like liquid fire, burning beneath his skin as his breath came in ragged gasps. His muscles tightened, his vision blurred, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. He had conquered boardrooms, crushed rivals, and built an empire with his own hands, but nothing had prepared him for this. Nia's hands gripped his shoulders, steadying him as his body convulsed. Her voice was urgent but calm. Don't fight it, Khalid. The more you resist, the more painful it will be. Fight what? He growled through clenched teeth, his head snapping up to look at her. His pupils had dilated, his usual sharp hazel eyes now dark and almost golden under the flickering torchlight. Tell me what is happening to me. The elder watched him in solemn silence. Your blood is awakening. Khalid let out a strangled breath. I don't believe in this, he snarled, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. He couldn't deny what was happening. His body was changing, his senses heightening, the cave around him feeling alive in a way it never had before. Nia reached up, her fingers brushing against his jaw. A shudder ran through him at the contact. You may not believe in it, she said softly, but it believes in you. A sharp pang shot through his spine, and he dropped to his knees with a gasp. He braced himself against the cold stone floor, feeling as if something inside him was trying to break free. The ancient carvings on the wall seemed to shift under his gaze, the serpents coiling, moving. The torches flickered violently, casting eerie shadows that twisted and danced around him. Naya knelt beside him, whispering something in a language he didn't understand. The elder raised his arms, chanting in deep, resonant tones that echoed through the chamber. The words vibrated through Khalid's skull, pulsing in his veins like a second heartbeat. His breath hitched. He could feel something slithering beneath his skin. Panic clawed at him. He ripped open the collar of his silk shirt, his chest rising and falling in erratic movements. His skin was hot, burning, his heartbeat pounding like war drums. And then, as if in response, a shadow moved across his arm, not from the fire, but from within his own flesh. His hands trembled as he watched the shape of a serpent ripple beneath his skin, coiling and stretching as if testing its newfound vessel. A deep, primal fear, unlike anything he had ever known, took hold of him. "What is this?" His voice was raw, almost unrecognizable. Nia's fingers dug into his arms, her eyes locked onto his, fierce and unwavering. "This is who you are." "No!" Khalid jerked away, staggering to his feet, his breathing erratic. This is some kind of trick, some kind of—" His words cut off as another wave of heat surged through his body, so intense it nearly brought him back to the ground. His senses were heightened to an unbearable degree. The flickering of the fire too bright, the damp scent of the cave overwhelming, the sound of his own pulse like a deafening drum in his ears. Naya stood, her own breathing uneven now. "You have been chosen, Khalid. Your ancestors fought against their nature, but it was never meant to be buried." His fists clenched. "You knew this would happen." "I suspected," she admitted, "but I didn't know it would happen so soon." Khalid turned away, his hands braced against the altar, his head hanging low. He could feel the energy coiling within him, waiting, watching. It was alive. The elder took a step forward, his voice steady. "The serpent god has awakened within you. Now, you must decide. Will you embrace it or be destroyed by it?" Khalid let out a shuddering breath. His entire world had just shifted, and there was no going back. Naya reached for him again, and this time he didn't pull away, because deep down, in the most primal part of himself, he already knew this was only the beginning. Khalid's breath came in ragged gasps as he braced himself against the cold stone altar. The weight of the elder's words pressed down on him like an unrelenting force. "The serpent god has awakened within you. Now, you must decide. Will you embrace it or be destroyed by it?" His body still trembled from the aftershocks of whatever had just surged through him. He could feel it beneath his skin, something ancient, something alive. It wasn't just the feverish heat burning inside him or the way his senses had sharpened beyond human limits. It was something deeper, something that had been waiting, watching. Nia stood beside him, her amber eyes fixed on his every movement. Her presence was steady, grounding, but there was something else in her gaze, a knowing, a familiarity that made his stomach tighten. "You were never meant to live an ordinary life, Khalid," she said softly, her voice threading through the heavy silence of the cave. "You were always meant to return here." He turned sharply to face her. "You speak as if I belong to this place." His voice was raw, edged with something he didn't recognize, fear, rage, or perhaps the terrifying realization that she was right. Naya's gaze didn't waver. "You do." Khalid clenched his jaw, shaking his head. This wasn't possible. He had spent his life building his empire, carving out his own fate with his bare hands. He was not some vessel for an ancient god, not some pawn in a prophecy written before he was born. And yet, his fingers grazed his forearm where he had seen it, the shape of the serpent slithering beneath his skin, coiling and stretching as if testing its new vessel. It had felt real. No, it was real. His heart pounded as he turned back to the elder, his voice rough with disbelief. If this is true, then what am I supposed to do? Just accept that I'm cursed? That this thing inside me is controlling me? The elder studied him for a long moment before speaking. A curse and a gift are often the same thing. It is not the serpent that controls you, Khalid. It is your own fear. Khalid let out a sharp breath. Fear? He let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. I don't fear anything. The elder's expression didn't change. Then why are you trembling? Khalid's muscles tensed. He wanted to argue, to deny it, but deep down, he knew. He had never felt anything like this before. Not in the boardrooms of Dubai, not in the high-stakes negotiations that had made him a billionaire, not even in the face of his most dangerous enemies. This was different. This was inside him. Nia stepped closer, her presence impossibly warm despite the damp chill of the cave. The serpent god is neither good nor evil, Khalid. It is power. Power that can be wielded but never tamed. She reached out, her fingers brushing lightly over his chest, just above his racing heart. It chose you. His breath hitched at her touch. There was something magnetic about her, something that pulled at him as much as the force awakening inside him. Khalid swallowed hard. And you? What is your place in all of this? Nia's expression shifted, something unspoken passing through her gaze. I am bound to you. His pulse pounded at her words. Bound? The elder answered for her. She carries the blood of the priestesses who have watched over the serpent god for centuries. Just as you were meant to return, she was meant to guide you. Khalid exhaled, shaking his head. This is insane. Naya's lips parted slightly, and for the first time since he arrived, he saw vulnerability flicker across her face. Is it? He stared at her. The weight of everything, the visions, the power surging inside him, the strange and undeniable pull between them. It was too much. And yet, he wasn't running. A sudden roar of thunder rumbled through the earth, making the cave tremble beneath them. The torches flickered wildly, the shadows stretching and twisting across the walls. The elder straightened. It has begun. Khalid's hands curled into fists. What has begun? Naya took a step back, her expression grim. The full awakening. His body seized with a sudden, overwhelming heat. His knees buckled, but before he could hit the ground, Naya was there, catching him. His vision blurred, the room spinning around him. He gasped, gripping his chest as the fire inside him exploded outward. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was Naya's face, her lips moving in words he couldn't hear, her fingers tight around his wrist. Then, everything disappeared. Darkness surrounded Khalid, a void so deep it felt like he had been swallowed by the very earth itself. His body was weightless, yet burning from the inside, as if molten fire had replaced his blood. Voices echoed in his mind, whispers of a forgotten language, a chorus of hissing sounds slithering through his consciousness. Then, suddenly, he was somewhere else. He stood in the middle of a vast desert, the sky above him a deep, unnatural shade of violet. The sand beneath his feet was alive, shifting and rippling like the scales of a great beast. He turned, searching for an explanation, but there was nothing. only emptiness. Then, from the dunes, it emerged. A massive serpent, black as the void, with eyes that burned like golden suns. Its body was endless, stretching beyond the horizon, coiling and uncoiling in ways that defied logic. Khalid could feel its presence inside him, pulsing in sync with his own heartbeat. He took a step back, his breathing ragged. The serpent spoke, not with words, but with a voice that resonated within his very soul. "You are mine." Khalid gasped, his knees nearly giving out beneath him. What are you?" The creature moved closer, its immense head lowering until its gaze was level with his. "I am the one who has always been with you, the blood that runs through your veins, the power that waits to be claimed." Khalid shook his head, his fists clenching at his sides. "No, I don't belong to you." The serpent let out a sound, a deep, rumbling hiss that was almost laughter. "You do not have a choice." And then, in a swift motion, it struck. Khalid screamed as the creature's fangs sank into his chest, pain erupting through his body like wildfire. His vision blurred, the world around him collapsing into chaos. He could feel himself changing, his skin tingling, his senses sharpening beyond human limits. Then, a voice called to him. "Khalid!" The darkness shattered. His eyes flew open, and he was back in the cave, gasping for air as if he had been drowning. Naya was kneeling beside him, her hands gripping his shoulders, her amber eyes filled with urgency. "You're awake," she breathed, relief washing over her features. Khalid's heart slammed against his ribs, his entire body trembling. His vision was sharper than before, too sharp. He could see the sweat beading on Naya's forehead, hear the faintest shift of fabric as she moved, feel the pulse of the earth beneath him. What happened to me?" His voice was rough, almost unrecognizable. The elder stepped forward, his expression grave. "You have fully awakened. The serpent god has claimed you." Khalid's breathing was still uneven. He looked down at his hands, expecting to see something inhuman, but they were the same, yet not the same. His skin felt hot, alive, as if something coiled beneath the surface. Nia reached for him, but hesitated. "How do you feel?" He looked at her, searching for an answer he didn't have. But one thing was certain. He was no longer just a man. He was something more, something terrifying. And the worst part? He didn't know if he wanted to fight it or embrace it. Khalid stood at the edge of the cave, the jungle stretching before him. The night air felt different, alive, humming with a power he could no longer deny. Nia stepped beside him, her warmth grounding him. "The choice is yours now," she whispered. He exhaled, his fingers curling. There was no turning back. The tribe gathered, their eyes filled with reverence. Khalid met Nia's gaze, knowing they were bound. By fate, by blood, by something greater than both. As the first light of dawn touched his skin, he finally accepted who he was. And with Nia by his side, he stepped into the unknown, not as a man, but as something more.